Hello, I'm Casey Aiken. This is 21 This Week. Coming up next, General Assembly overrides Governor Hogan's veto of police reform bills. Will this make communities safer? Hold on to your wallets. Maryland lawmakers give counties local income taxing authority. And popular Lieutenant Governor Boyds Rutherford announces that he will not run for governor in 2022. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher, Attorney Ron Little, and guest commentator, former House of Delegate member Maricé Morales. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. The Maryland General Assembly, which ended its sessions earlier this week, was declared by Governor Larry Hogan as the most successful and bipartisan session since he became governor. It certainly was one of the most active. From police reform to addressing social programs, this legislature passed numerous bills into law. Here with us today is former House of Delegate member Maricé Morales to discuss what could be described as a landmark shift in police reform. Maricé, police reform was the major item on the agenda this year. The resulting legislation includes limits on police use of force, creates a civilian-run disciplinary process, creates a statewide investigative unit to investigate police shootings, opens up personnel records to public scrutiny. This is all a very big agenda, but why was it necessary?
Absolutely. Thanks, Casey, again for the invitation. And we know that the General Assembly they worked on over 2,500 bills this session. And as a former member of the Judiciary Committee, a lot of these bills were in the works for over almost, I would say even a decade. So these bills were necessary, Casey, for different reasons. The number one reason I would say is to bring back trust between law enforcement and the community. We know that across the nation, Black men have lost their lives at the hands of police. And these are supposed to be individuals who are supposed to protect our communities, not just certain ones. And so as you so eloquently stated earlier, the major changes are around the disciplinary processes when it comes to police accountability. So now in lieu of fellow officer trial boards, now there's going to be disciplinary boards comprised of members of the public, a retired judge, and a member of the police force, and that would be the appeal board. But the first board would be made of all civilians and all appointed by the Senate and the House. So it's not just a willy-nilly composition of individuals. Furthermore, we also know that there was this was a great change in terms of legal standards now for the use of excessive force. Law enforcement will have to use proportionate and necessary force in order to prevent imminent harm or danger to themselves or others. And then lastly, one of the big changes as well is to the no-knock warrants, the no-knock warrant rule. Now an officer will have to demonstrate that by knocking into somebody's household that they would endanger the lives within them or themselves. So a lot there to unpack, Casey, but like you well said, it's a victory. Of course, there's still a lot of work to do, and I want to commend one of my personal mentors, Senator Jill Carter, and also one of our Montgomery County delegates, Gabe Acebero, for their phenomenal work this session.
Well, I'd like to address some of those items with you, but I'm just going to go first to another couple of set questions for Mark and Ron, and then we'll circle back because not all of the things that were passed some of them were very controversial. And Mark, in addition to the aforementioned changes, the most controversial change was the repeal of the Officers' Bill of Rights. And there are many that feel that this is going to discourage people from joining the police and force police members to resign, particularly coupled with some of the other changes that Maricé just talked about.
Well, I kind of want to acknowledge, first of all, that there was bipartisan support for some of the changes. And what were controversial were some of the ones, such as the one you just mentioned. For example, on the Policeman's Bill of Rights, I would support if there's been a determination that a police officer has done something wrong, that ought to be disclosed, that ought to be open. But that's not what was done. What was done was the record of all complaints and the personal records of the files are made available. And that's an area where I think there was really the most heartburn, since police officers are sometimes the target of completely scurrilous accusations. And if that's been determined, I'm not sure that should necessarily be made public. And I think that's an unfortunate aspect of these provisions.
If I may, I would just respectfully respond that the reason why the public should have access to all complaints is because, for example, in the death of Anton Black, the individual whose name the act was named after, he in that instance, the officer had more than 24 of complaints, and that's why the legislature in their wisdom decided in that. But it's my understanding that the public would have access to it when a complaint arises. Not just the complaint that, let's say I'm complaining against an officer, and not just that complaint, but I could have access to, if it's and that's because if it's a repeat officer, right, we should know that. So,
well, certainly if a determination is made that an officer has acted wrongly, if this process of review is so effective, then presumably they're able to make a determination that a complaint is not valid, and that's where the record ought to be kept private.
If I may, I think part of the other consideration is that, as we breach this divide, so to speak, between what the public expects and what the police departments expect, whether cases are founded or unfounded is really determined by who's reviewed the case. So as we move forward, citizen intervention and participation will likely decrease the amount of incidents that we see, and we'll be able to dispense with the other cases that didn't have citizen participation that in a lot of people's eyes deserve a little bit more scrutiny. The overarching issue is that the public doesn't trust the police process in determining who's qualified to still be out on the street enforcing the laws. And we've seen across the nation that there have been some pretty suspect cases that have brought this issue, into greater focus. And the Maryland General Assembly, in an effort to quell some of the issues, has made this effort. And I think it's a fantastic effort.
Well, even though it might, it doesn't come without some trepidation, because it's very subjective at times when what is the standard, as Delegate Morales described, for excessive use of force. When is that force permissible? Some of these things get to be very subjective in their own nature, and also coupled with the fact that you've repealed the Officers' Bill of Rights, it would make one pause as to whether or not law enforcement is the career they should go into, or whether or not law enforcement in the state of Maryland is the career they should go into.
I think that if people are committed and it's the kind of work that they feel in their heart that they need to do, that they'll still do it. Hopefully this effort helps us to get a better representative police department. And we know that within the police department, there are those who view some of their peers' activity as questionable, and they don't want those police officers on the force as much as the rest of us do. So
you all see, but Ron, we do see the differences between different jurisdictions as to the capabilities of those police forces, and most of the time it comes down to training.
Right.
And a determination by elected leaders that they want a well-trained, efficient police force, and that takes sometimes generations to instill into the force, the body of the force, the members of the force.
And to really piggyback on what you've said, Casey, I think that there's a very wide disparity within among Maryland jurisdictions about the confidence that folks have in the police force. Frankly, with the gun task force and what have you, with riding rough with Freddie Gray, there's very good reason to be suspect about the Baltimore Police Department, and also Prince George's County has had its share of problems, but they're not typical, or they're not characteristic of really police forces in other jurisdictions. And unfortunately, this law was presumably, or seems to be, written to address the jurisdictions with the problem, as opposed to the forces that really have not had quite as many.
So I'm going to give Delegate Morales the last word on this. I take it from your earlier comments that you're quite pleased with the passage of this bill.
I am, Casey, and I'll just end on a positive note. Just so you know, the General Assembly did want to make sure that law enforcement in general, that they know that we do appreciate the sacrifice. And for that, they actually set up a scholarship fund to cover up to 50% tuition for individuals across the state that would like to pursue a career in law enforcement. And I think that's really to show that, you know, the legislature's intention is not to discourage anybody. Of course, law enforcement officers are, you know, our community leaders, our heroes. This reform is just for, you know, in the unfortunate situations when we have individuals not respecting the life of many community members. So I would just end it at that, Casey.
Well, thanks so much. I mean, it's an interesting. I mean, we're going to see the changes take effect, and hopefully result in a positive gain for the entire community. I want to thank Delegate Morales for being with us today. And as we go to break, when we come back, grab your wallets, everybody. Local governments gain greater authority and, of course, flexibility in setting rates for income taxes. Just stay tuned. And welcome back. If you've been a regular follower of this show, you know we've talked a lot about police reform during this General Assembly, but there actually was other legislation that the General Assembly had passed, which was a bevy of bills, including legal gambling on sports, pandemic financial relief, election law changes, but the most interesting of them all is the authorization for counties to gain control, and of course, some would say flexibility, and setting rates for local income taxes, including allowing for graduated rates for different income levels. Mark, as to this expansion in local control of taxes, isn't this just a license for local governments to raise taxes willy-nilly as they see fit?
As I read that, no, that the top cap that a county can impose is set at 3.2%, which is the rate that 2/3 of the population of Maryland are under. So in fact, what this would permit, now to be sure, Anne Arundel County had wanted, at some point Pittman wanted authority to raise it beyond that, but that's not what was got. So potentially, if you're stuck at 3.2, some jurisdictions, say Talbot County or Kent County, small counties, could decide to reduce taxes. And part of what the bill does is there were some complicated formulas that effectively penalized counties that reduce taxes to reduce tax without penalty.
Yeah, reduce taxes, sure. Nobody believes that. Come on. No local government reduces taxes. This is just the camel's nose under the tent, Mark. Hopefully in my lifetime they'll be raising taxes precipitously.
Well, but they did set up the minimum tax was raised to 2.6, so the level of flexibility is not as great. Right. But you're right.
All right. I guess I'm just a skeptic here. So, Ron, one of the other big changes was legalized sports gambling. Is that a good idea? Don't we have enough gambling in the county and the state already?
Well, I think it's like everything else. When the government sees an opportunity to harness the power of something that's already taken off, if there's a way to help benefit the populace at large, then it's worth pursuing. I think, sports betting has been going on, for hundreds of years. To the extent that making it legal will allow us to increase the coffers through taxation and other surcharges, I say, why not give it a shot, especially coming out of the pandemic. Everybody needs relief. And those who have it and want to bet, want to help the little guy next door who doesn't have it, I say go for it.
Well, I'm the world's worst gambler. I wouldn't.
They love you at the casino.
They love
though.
me. No, they never see me at the casino. Believe me, I know better than that. But Mark, one of the changes talking about casinos is the change in the voting laws, which allows for an opt-in for a permanent vote by mail. Is this a good idea?
Well, I wish that if they were going to do that, they ought to have adopted one of the provisions that the Georgia law that everybody is so controversial, wishes to get rid of on mail-in ballots, get rid of the signature match, which, as our signatures change over time, is a really problematic approach. And what Georgia did is switch that to a digit. Either it's the Social Security, last 4 digits Social Security, or an identifier from the driver's license, which is a much better system than matching signatures. And I think it's a good provision from Georgia, and it's something that Maryland ought to adopt for mail-in ballots.
But the idea of a permanent opt-in for mail-in voting list, does that make sense?
It's really not that different. You can sign up for absentee already. So that I mean, I've read that, and it's not all that different from the current law, which allows for people to sign up to regularly get absentee ballots. Well, I know now that absentee is no longer the term and it's mail-in ballots, but that was the process before.
Okay. All right. All right. I guess given the controversy of the last 2 elections over mail-in balloting.
And absolutely, and that's why signature matching was dropped in a number of states, and that has been a source of great controversy. There are better ways to authenticate ballots, and that's what we ought to be doing.
Okay. So, Ron, there was a very popular program that passed, and that was the expansion of mental health services, named in honor of Thomas Raskin, the late son of Congressman Jamie Raskin. What exactly does that bill do in terms of additional services?
Well, it's designed to have the Maryland Department of Health create a 211 opt-in service for those who choose to opt in, what I would like to refer to as a preemptive bridge that would allow or permit phone calls or text messages to those who opt into the service to make sure that folks are doing okay, and that, if there are needs, that they're being met. I think that as we've seen, throughout this pandemic, mental health crises are, they're becoming more prevalent, more extreme, more publicly demonstrated. So we need to figure out a way to help people recognize that it's okay to have these challenges, and to let them know that there is help available for them, and that, the government, whether local, state, or federal, wants to see people find their way clear to whatever remedy is going to have them be able to live a happy and productive life. I think this is a fantastic effort, and it's much needed, again, especially after this pandemic.
Yeah, just as we were coming onto the air this afternoon, I saw a headline from Bethesda Beat magazine concerning the number of opioid deaths that have occurred in the past year, and the increase was something like 60% increase over 2019, which just again demonstrates the need for not only mental health opportunities, but also drug abuse opportunities. And I think that's the unseen factor that we discounted during the pandemic, is the health that we all have and that we've all suffered. So it's a terrible thing. And hopefully this bill will give some solace to people who are in need. When we come back, well, I'm sorry, we're moving right on to our next and last topic, which is kind of a curious one, because this deals with someone whom I've known a long time and I've liked immensely, not only because he was a panelist on 21 this week, and that person is Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford, who announced during an interview, and of all things, ironically, with the co-founder of 21 this week, Bruce DuPoit, that he would not seek election to succeed Governor Larry Hogan. Mark, how does that decision change things for Republicans?
Well, Boyd would have been a great candidate. He's a great guy. He certainly would have been sort of a fitting approach to the continuation of the Hogan legacy. That said, there's already a field of candidates. Kelly Schultz has announced that she's running. Barry Glassman is the county executive. Forgive me, I can't remember if he's in yet or he's planning to be in, but he'll be running for governor. And yes, there's always Robin Ficker.
Well, I thought you were going to put your hat in the ring, Rob.
No.
Huh? Boyd, for anybody who knows him, is such a class act. And we were blessed to have him as a panelist for 4 years. He was introduced to the program by Steve Kraszewski, who'd been chief of staff for Governor Ehrlich. And so, I mean, what a great guy, and wish him all the best. And I can imagine, because he's such a class act, that he didn't want to put his family through the trials and tribulations of a hotly contested political campaign. When your name is at the top of the ticket, there's a different level of scrutiny that people seem to take. They look for things that you might have said in high school, in your high school yearbook years ago. So who wants that kind of who wants that kind of scrutiny? I know I sure wouldn't. Stay tuned for Parting Shots when we come back from this short break. Now with Parting Shots, Mark Uncapher.
Well, I'd like to congratulate, as we come to the end of the session, we also come to the end of the term for the leaders of the Republicans in the House, both Nick Kipke and Kathy Szeliga. I think Marylanders remember Kathy, who ran for the Senate. Both have been leaders much longer than most, and they really are thanked for their service. They're being replaced by Jason Buckle and Chris Adams, who will both lead very appropriately. And as we've talked about, I think we'll all be looking to Kelly Schultz, who I've known for over a decade, and I think will be a great addition to the dialogue that we have in Maryland in the gubernatorial election.
Thank you, Mark. Ron Little, your parting shot.
My parting shot is a shout out to the entire Maryland General Assembly. I think they did a fantastic job this year in their bipartisan efforts to really promote and engage in legislation that the public finds useful and necessary. I think everyone being able to come together really it's a shining light in what would ordinarily be a not so consequential year, but given the pandemic and everything that everyone has gone through, the efforts with mental health reform and opportunity and police reform really speak to the cries of the public, and they've done a fantastic job and taken a step forward to address those needs.
Well, thank you, Ron. This was a real test for the leadership of Adrienne Jones and Senate President Ferguson. It was in all essence, it was their first real term for both of them to exercise their power after succeeding two very legendary lawmakers. So it was an interesting session to watch. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank Delegate Maricé Morales for being our special guest to talk about police reform. And I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.